I'm Brett Baer in Washington, and this is a Fox News alert. Breaking late this afternoon, the FBI revealed a plot by a suspected ISIS terrorist on the U.S. Capitol. That's just the latest in a number of high-profile terrorism stories we're covering for you tonight. I'll speak with the French ambassador to the U.S. about Paris and his country's war against radical Islam in just a moment. But first, Chief Intelligence Correspondent Catherine Herridge is live with the very latest. Hi, Catherine.
Brett, the 7-page criminal complaint accuses a Cincinnati, Ohio man of pledging his support for ISIS online and actively plotting to wage violent jihad with the U.S. Capitol as his target. In the fall of 2014, the FBI says 20-year-old Christopher Cornell revealed his plans to attack the Capitol to a confidential source working for the FBI. Cornell is accused of saving money to fund the operation, viewing al-Qaeda propaganda videos, as well as researching his target and the construction of pipe bombs. He was also charged with the, quote, attempted killing of a U.S. government officer and the possession of a firearm in furtherance of an attempted crime of violence. The court documents say Cornell was inspired by the American cleric Anwar al-Awlaki, who was in charge of al-Qaeda in Yemen's plotting against the West. Al-Awlaki is also directly tied to the Paris massacre. According to court documents, Cornell stated, quote, I believe we should just wage jihad under our own orders and plan attacks and everything. We already got a thumbs up from the brothers over there and Anwar al-Awlaki before his martyrdom. Separately, al-Qaeda in Yemen, also known as AQAP, released an 11-minute video today laying claim to the Paris massacre. The State Department told reporters there is no reason to doubt the tape's authenticity, adding the commando-style assault in Paris is consistent with the terror group. When pressed on the Paris massacre, where the Kouachi brothers said they were sent by al-Qaeda in Yemen, the State Department spokeswoman seemed to go off message, admitting that al-Qaeda in Pakistan, also known as al-Qaeda Corps, is not decimated or on the run, as President Obama has consistently emphasized.
AQ Corps also clearly remains a threat, as we've talked about. ISIS is a different kind of threat, as we've also talked about, which is why we're going after them in Iraq and Syria.
Tonight, a Justice Department official emphasized that the Ohio suspect was never in a position to execute his plot on the Capitol, Brett.
Catherine, thank you. Head back for breaking details. France, meantime, is making moves against Islamic extremists in the wake of last week's Paris attacks. Francois Hollande is sending an aircraft carrier to the Middle East to join the U.S.-led coalition against ISIS. The French government ordered a crackdown on anti-Semitism and other hate speech, already rounding up several dozen people on related charges. Charlie Hebdo's first issue since the attack sold out before dawn. Another print run of some 2 million more copies is planned. Now let's bring in the French ambassador to the U.S., Gerard Araud. Mr. Ambassador, thank you so much for being here.
Good evening.
Let's start with the latest on this investigation. There is apparently a new suspect who has been identified, an accomplice.
Yes, because the problem we have now is that it's obvious that these two killers or three killers were supported by a network. So we have to dismantle the network, and apparently we have first identified one member of the network, and secondly, we know now from where the weapons are coming. Apparently they were bought in Brussels, in the neighborhood of the railway station, where there is a lot of trafficking. You know, because now weapons are in Europe are coming from the Balkans. So you have a lot of Kalashnikov, unfortunately, which are that you can buy now for a few thousand euros.
The video we saw today was al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula taking credit for this attack. We know that both of the brothers, the Kouachi brothers, traveled out of the country to Yemen, and there was some kind of coordination, according to intelligence officials. What do you know about the tie to al-Qaeda?
That's one of the big questions that we have to answer, because there are two main possibilities. One is that al-Qaeda is the sponsor. You know, they simply said, do and kill these guys. And or the other one would be that al-Qaeda is the operational commander of the operation. And it makes a lot of difference, because if we discover that al-Qaeda can organize such an attack from the Yemen, of course it would be very serious. And it may be the case, because the attack was very professional. It was not lone wolves the way, you know, we were expecting, and they behave as a military commando. also. So it's really very worrying. So the investigation is conducted precisely on this point.
So just over the few hours, we have another person being named here, but there are other people being looked for.
Of course.
Tied to this cell.
Yeah. You know, it's a network. So now we have to look for the people. Some names are floating around. We know so that the wife of Koulibaly, you know, the killer of the kosher grocery shop, has succeeded to go to Syria the day before. Apparently, she crossed the border the day before the attack, and she was with somebody that we have identified and which is linked also to this to the radicals. So again, we are in the investigation.
I want to, the world has obviously reacted to these attacks. I want you to take a listen to the Turkish president and his comments and have you react.
The hypocrisy of the West is obvious. As Muslims, we never stood up for terrorism. We never stood up for massacres. But it is racism, hatred, and Islamophobia that lies beneath these massacres. Officials of the countries where our mosques are attacked should take measures against these incidents. These are provocations.
Your reaction to that?
Well, I don't, you know, I'm only an ambassador. I don't react to a president. What I want to say is, as the French Prime Minister has said, we are at war, and we are at war with radical Islam. It means that right now that Islam, and in a sense the Muslims are the first victims, but Islam is breeding, you know, a radicalism which is quite dangerous for everybody. So I think that in the coming weeks or the coming months we have to define a global strategy, and a part of the strategy is to work with the Muslim countries. They have to do their part of the job.
Are you surprised by the reluctance of the Obama administration to use the word radical Islam?
You know, everybody has its own sensitivity. You know, really, that's the political life in the U.S. It's not the same thing that the political life in France. The fact is, in France, is that, as we have known, an attack which was really an attack by Islamists. And it was not only an attack only by Islamists, but it was an attack on the Western democratic values. So, so that's led our government to define the war, to say, now it's clear what we have. On one side, radical Islamists, on the other side, democracy.
I have heard you and other French officials deal with the Unity March and the lack of a high-profile U.S. official. I'm not going to ask you about that, but I do want to ask you about the challenges uniquely to France, with some 6 million Muslims, and this question about assimilation and multiculturalism and what's happening in your country and the challenge that involves.
Well, again, first, in a sense, it's not only a French challenge, it's a European challenge. Why the French, in a sense, we are on the forefront? It's because we have the first Jewish community out of the US, and we have the first Muslim community in Europe. So, and that's the reason, in a sense, why we are the first truck. But all European countries are threatened. You know, I think it was yesterday or a few days ago, the head of the British MI5 said an attack against London is, I quote, highly likely. So we are, all of us, we have the same problem. We have a problem of assimilation of immigrants, and most of the immigrants in Europe are Muslims, but it's not because you are disadvantaged in a society that you become a killer. The fact is that we have an integration problem, and there is also the problem of radical Islam, and that's not the same, you know, really. It's one maybe the breeding ground for the other.
Mr. Ambassador, we appreciate your time today.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. The reach and strength of Islamic militants and terrorists grows by the day, and even though one powerful force in terror hasn't grabbed headlines lately, it has captured a lot of ground. National security correspondent Jennifer Griffin reminds us of the grave threat posed by Boko Haram.
With all eyes on Paris, the head of Boko Haram tried to retake the spotlight, praising the attack in France in a new video. The Nigerian Islamic terrorists kidnapped 200 Christian schoolgirls last April, prompting a Twitter campaign for their release. It's been on the move, capturing 12 towns in the past 6 months. They now control more territory than ISIS.
President Obama has been able to draw forces into the Iraq and Syrian region to be able to confront ISIS. Boko Haram and its spread in northern Nigeria and across the northern part of the continent of Africa is equally a threat.
Boko Haram fighters slaughtered up to 2,000 people last week in Baga after capturing a military base used by international counterterrorism troops, causing some to ask why, after I am Charlie, the world is not saying I am Baga. Dr. Lionel Rollins has been invited to President Obama's extremism summit next month.
We essentially are in Boko Haram's backyard, and we have a lot of Americans who actually live there and teach there, and they have their families there. And so you cannot just leave us stranded like that.
Competing for attention with ISIS and Al-Qaeda, Boko Haram recently sent a 10-year-old female suicide bomber into a marketplace, killing 16 people.
We haven't seen Boko Haram focus beyond the region.
Just like everything else, it starts regional, and if like a cancer, it spreads.
The Nigerian government, meanwhile, canceled a U.S. counterterrorism training program last month, and senior U.S. officials confirm it has not asked for U.S. drones to take off in search of the kidnapped girls for some time. Brett?
Jennifer Griffin live at the Pentagon. Jennifer, thank you. Up next, Republicans make the case against President Obama's immigration plan, while national security, of course, hangs in the balance. First, here's what some of our Fox affiliates across the country are covering tonight. KFOX 14 in El Paso covering a deadly crash in West Texas. 8 inmates and 2 corrections officers died after a bus carrying state prisoners lost control in icy conditions and collided with a freight train. KTVU is covering 2 daring climbers closing in on the top of the 3,000-foot peak in California's Yosemite National Park. The pair started the grueling half-mile climb 2 days after Christmas and have been climbing without the use of harnesses and ropes. And this is a live look at Phoenix from our affiliate out there, KSAZ. The big story there tonight, the secret testimony of Jodi Arias. She fessed up to killing her former lover once the public and the press left the room back in October. Arias was convicted last year for the 2008 death of Travis Alexander. A new jury is now deciding on life in prison or the death penalty. That's tonight's live look outside the Beltway from Special Report. We'll be right back.